I feel like we can start. Hello, hello, everyone. I am so happy to be here again on this wonderful sunny Friday. My name's Laura. I'm part of the CLS Global team, and this is another CLS podcast. And I'm so happy to be hosting it again. Guys, can you please introduce yourselves?
Yes, of course. Let me continue the CLS Global introduction. My name is Andre Burrell, and I'm CBDO of CLS Global. And I'll pass further to Nibiru and Apps.
Hi, Unique here. I'm one of the founders of Nibiru.
Hello, everyone. My name is Taylor. I am head of community at DAppOS. So yeah, happy to be here. Excited to get into the topic and learn a lot from all of you today.
Amazing, amazing. So we have a quick intro with some stats. So decentralized applications, which is our main topic today, have long promised a future where users control their data and money in an open and transparent internet. The number of dApps being developed has been constantly increasing every year. The number went up from around 20 at the starting point of 2017 to 2,500 by the end of the third quarter of 2018. But over the 10 years after Ethereum first introduced dApps, every day adoption remains limited. So, what will it take for dApps to go on mainstream? We will explore that on this episode with our special guest, Unique Divine, co-founder of Nibiru Chain, and Taylor Harris, head of community of DAppOS. So, starting our questions. So, to start up, let's go back to the beginning. When did each of you first start using dApps, and what was your initial reaction, and how have your perspectives changed since then?
I'd love to hear Taylor speak on that.
Sure. So actually, to be honest, I'm more of a latecomer to the game. I think the first time I started hearing about blockchain or this idea of crypto, Bitcoin, was back in 2017. I was actually in school. Prior to Web3, I was in graphic design in the design industry. So I remember hearing about these things, and I remember like I had some friends at the time, and then they were investing in Bitcoin, making a lot of money, and so. But not until I think 2021 is when I really dove into it. And at the time, like I said, I was working as a graphic designer, and a lot of my friends were making money off NFTs. And I was like, what is an NFT? How does this work? How are you buying and selling? Like, well, I had the question, how do you exactly buy, sell, and trade crypto, right? And so my brother was in the industry long before I was, and so he was the one that like first helped me set up my MetaMask. And then it just kind of just spiraled from there. I got more interested. I have preferences with wallets. I got into the Web3 industry. So I think for me, the starting point was about 2021. And I think the main thing that helped me get into that was obviously, like I said, some of my peers were you know, um, into the NFT world. So I think starting from 2021, that would be my starting point. And I think ever since then, I've seen not that the industry has, grown a whole lot in 2 years, but compared to a lot of industries, it has changed a lot. There has been like, so many developments. You've seen, you begin to see lots of different dApps. So yeah, 2021 is the starting point for me. A little bit late to the game, but sticking around.
Yeah, similar story on my side. Started in 2021, and I actually started, probably the first time I used a dApp was actually working in Web3. So I bought and sold spot on like centralized exchanges like years prior, but first time, was probably just Uniswap in 2021, and of course the same similar flow, MetaMask, Aave. So I probably tried like DeFi as the entry point on my side.
That's great. And now you're in DeFi, right? So basically for me it was the same as like yours. It would be Uniswap. Obviously, Trust Wallet also has quite a few dApps built in that. So I've used multiple of them. I don't remember which ones, but when I needed some service, that's what I used. So I think we're going to have more and more and more things popping up and happening. But for me, Uniswap was one of the first ones as well.
So I would say that, I mean, for all of you, the early experience often comes with like common misconceptions. So, what myths about dApps would you debunk for a newcomer?
I think I can touch on this first. I think one myth is all dApps are completely decentralized, right? And I do think there is obviously truth behind that. I do think not all dApps are fully decentralized. I mean, there is this idea of decentralization, and we all, whether you prefer centralization or decentralization, we're here to talk about dApps, right? So we do prefer decentralization, but I do think not all dApps are fully decentralized. There is a spectrum of decentralization. Some dApps are, let's say, partially decentralized, um, but they still rely on centralized components for certain functions, right? So while others may be fully decentralized with no central authority or point of control, I think it's important to assess the level of decentralization of a dApp before using it. So I think that's one of the one of the main myths. And then another one I'd like to touch on is all dApps are free to use, right? So in a perfect world, we want to live, we want to buy, sell, and trade. We want to use these dApps free of charge. But the truth of that is there's fees, right? We are very familiar with gas fees. So I think those are two of the big ones for me. I think, one myth being dApps are completely decentralized, and the other myth being they're free to use. So obviously, the more you get into dApps, the more you learn that. And I think over time, hopefully, we can move away from those things. But at the end of the day, it's an industry that is heavily backed by money or heavily influenced by money. So I think the second one, there's some workaround in regards to, eventually how to remove gas fees. So yeah, that's my take on that one.
Yeah,
Awesome.
I would
Does anyone else have anything? Yeah, go ahead.
I'd say another common misconception is like uh, tying too heavily a connection between usage of a particular protocol or dApp and like the token stability or price that like is used for its governance, because they don't necessarily correspond. So I think I was surprised to find in the space that like a lot of protocols that have really high volume or TVL don't necessarily have anything going on with the token, or also vice versa, right? There could be projects where there's not a lot of substance, and the token's not necessarily correlated at all. So yeah, not a hard rule, but it is a misconception, I think, for newcomers.
Right, right. And if we're transitioning to today, what are the biggest limitations right now to mass adoption of dApps?
Um, User experience. I mean, UX, right? There's two words, user experience. I do think this is one of the big problems, right? This is one of the big limitations. Not that if you're well versed in Web3, you've been around the space. Like, for example, I've been around since 2021, which is, quite late, but it never gets easier, right? Web3 is always advancing. There's always technology advancements. There's always these new terms you need to learn. Um, but I do think one of the big things is obviously, yeah, usability and user experience. Many apps are complex and can be very intimidating for your average Web 2 user or your average mobile app user. And I know another one I think is obviously user interface from like a design perspective, from a marketing perspective. Sometimes user interface is often overlooked in regards to UX, and so it could be complicated. You don't, you get onto a dApp and you don't exactly know how to navigate the dApp just based on, let's say poor user interface. And so that obviously ties into the user experience as well. And then I think another big one is like lack of awareness. There's just like actually not enough information. There's not enough educational resources out there in regards to Web3. I mean, we do see a lot of KOLs, spreading great information and sharing insights into the industry, but at the same time, it is still growing, so there's still a lot to be learned. If let's say my mom or dad, if I send them an article about, oh, this is a dApp and this is how you use it, it's going to be very, very foreign to them. So I think two of the big things for me is obviously user experience and just lack of awareness, not enough educational resources out there for Web 2 users to make the jump to Web 3 like seamlessly.
Thanks, Taylor. And topping up the question, so you mentioned user experience, right? So if most of the companies who create dApps, they understand that may be an obstacle for retail users to get in and use their app, why don't they put it as a main priority? What do you think? Why we have so many bad user experience, user interface dApps?
I think just because this industry relies heavily on tech, right? And so there's a lot of people who are very well versed, engineers, developers, where they understand this tech very much so to where, the user interface, the user experience seems normal to them, but to your average user, to your everyday, like I said, Web 2 mobile app user, it's a whole different world. Like even for me, a lot of times, coming from a marketing background, I'll travel around to a lot of conferences. Like I was just at 2049, KBW, and sometimes I have great conversations, but then sometimes I have these conversations where I'm like, I'm pretty up to date with Web3, but I'm not exactly sure what you're talking about. Like there's, these developers who are very smart, they're very understanding of the tech. So I think one of the big things is the industry is so focused where we need to not slow down the tech because the tech is always going to be advancing, but make it more understandable and relatable to your average user. And I think that's how we're going to obviously onboard create mass adoption of Web3.
Gotcha. Thanks for explaining that. So basically, we need a makeup artist for our tech guys who provide these solutions. So yeah, I agree with you on that.
Yeah, I have a different take, but along a similar vein. In I think like a lot of what hinders mass adoption comes from like um, making it obvious to people or providing solutions that actually uh, solve a certain pain point that otherwise you wouldn't have a solution for outside of Web3. So like if we think of say, I think right now, I mean it's a bear market, so this isn't like super terrible, but like Ethereum, I think monthly active users is on the I don't have it in front of me, but I think it's like between like 5 and 10 million, right? In terms of people versus if you compare to something like Uber or Amazon. I know it's like an unfair comparison because they're giant, but it's almost like they're on the scales in like the hundreds of millions in monthly actives. And I think part of that is because like, if you need a ride somewhere and you don't have it, it's a pretty pressing problem. So it makes a ton of sense. Versus like a lot of the things that people make solutions for in Web3 sometimes aren't really solving a problem that, like your grandmother would have or something, or would be apparent to them. But the tech is starting to get to like more of a point where that's becoming relevant. But I think that's one of the huge sticking points is like we have to be solving problems that, you know, um, actually, it goes beyond just like speculative investing, right? So yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. So what do you think? What do you think about the security wise? So for example, I know that according to stats, I believe if I'm correct, it's about 87% of people in America. I think it takes on Canada as well, Canada and US. They are uncertain about any, like in general, um, about the blockchain and the security of their funds, right? Because in a classic uh, world, right, where we have the banking system, we have a third party. But if the money gets stolen, they recover that. You have insurance and things like that. So in blockchain and the like dApps, there is no real security. So for example, if you send the money to a not correct blockchain, they may just disappear. Do you think that is also an obstacle? And if yes, then how can it potentially be resolved?
Yeah, like I do think security is often overlooked. Even in like, centralized or traditional banking system, not everyone like it's not hard to trust the banking system, but there's still people who don't trust like, the the banking system. And so I do think in regards to Web3 and, decentralized apps, it gets even more intense. Like dApps can be vulnerable to hacks, smart contract bugs, and other security issues. And we've seen that. We've seen people who were highly invested in the market, like for example, like FTX, right? A lot of people, they lost their trust over that, and it kind of impacted the industry in a lot of ways. But I think obviously with the tech, as the tech continues to grow, as long as you have a great tech team, backing your project, they're always on, top of it. There is going to be issues, but I think it's just how fast you resolve those issues is how you can keep people's trust. Because it's never going to be perfect, but as long as you can battle those issues, battle those problems, and keep your users on board because they can trust what they're doing, they can trust how they're trading, I think is important.
I mean, talking about kind of leading to the next topic, I guess, talking about some of the huge names that we know, like some of the most popular dApps like PancakeSwap, Axie Infinity, Uniswap. So, what factors have fueled their success? What do you guys think?
I could more talk about, I guess, Uniswap or PancakeSwap. So, um, I guess with, let's take in the case of Uni, part of it is like kind of first mover advantage. Now, it's not like they were the first like spot decks, but basically the closest thing to it was like Balancer, but came out like, a year or a year and a half after. And Uni was the first like I think popular non-order book decks that came into play. So part of it is like first mover advantage, but they've also just like kind of similar to the Ethereum roadmap, they've just like continued to innovate. And it's now at the point where like, on AMMs it's pretty simple, right? If you have more liquidity or you have a better algorithm or like just better math built into the protocol, those are kind of the two ways to beat them. So for Uniswap, it's very difficult to make a design so much better while that you can justify someone switching over to it without having the monstrous liquidity. So part of it is just like, economies of scale. The first mover advantage coupled with, you know, you not only have to beat them in terms of a design at this point, you'd have to somehow get massive amounts of liquidity for it to even be a similar solution for like the deck side. But yeah.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Okay, we have some questions from our users as well, so I'm quite excited to ask them since they're part of our giveaway. And just a reminder that after our podcast, we'll randomly choose one listener who will receive $50, and we will announce it on Andre's account. So stay tuned. If you aren't following, make sure you follow and stay tuned with us after our podcast. So the first question is, how do you envision a future where dApps seamlessly interact across various blockchain networks? And what challenges do you anticipate in achieving this?
I think I can jump into that first. I think one of the big things is obviously cross-chain interoperability, right? So I think in the future, different blockchains have improved, the interoperability standards, which, allows obviously for the seamless transfer of assets and data between them. Users can easily move their assets and interact with dApps across various blockchain networks, and, without the need for the multiple wallets or complex processes. And I think the second one obviously is a unified user experience, like I kind of touched on before. User experience really at the end of the day is very important, and like that's how these dApps are going to seamlessly interact across various blockchain networks. But obviously the challenges with that is making the leap, right? There is a big jump from Web 2 to Web 3, and so the more we can focus on like how to build that bridge, how to bridge that gap, I think in the future dApps will become more seamless.
Got it. Got it. Okay, the next question is, what are the potential social, political, and economic implications of a fully decentralized and autonomous dApp ecosystem?
Yeah, I think that just like lets you capture, you know, the initial ethos of like, Satoshi Nakamoto and programmable money that we kind of have from the early crypto days is if it's fully decentralized, it also means it's kind of, we could say like regulation proof or hard to topple over. So um, that part of why, I think that's something that kind of gets like lost in the weeds sometimes, but that is like kind of essential where, you know, crypto or just like um, dApps are kind of meant to be uh, fault tolerant or kind of hard to shut off. And so that happens if the more you decentralize, it kind of like, you know, makes you more future proof, I guess I would say.
I think something I want to touch on, obviously, and I think political is interesting. And political is not often brought into the question, but I do think I'm based in the U.S. and the voting system is not perfect. Like obviously, there's been elections in the past where there's like there maybe was voter fraud and stuff, and I think election and voting, I think obviously like blockchain based dApps, they can be used to create secure and transparent election and voting systems, right? So obviously, like reducing the fraud, increasing trust in the electoral process. So I think a lot of times in this industry, you overlook like how can this be used in the real world, right? But I think this is a good example, especially with like this year, the election coming up for a new president in the U.S. I think this is one thing that obviously could, be a solution to a lot of those problems. So I think it's, interesting take on, like I said, like you often overlook the political side of it, but I think that's something that could be implemented is, being able to use these dApps for election and voting.
Yes, definitely, that would be a very interesting world, Taylor, when supposedly we'll have a fair elections. Let's see how it plays out and what's going to happen. What do you guys also think about the social side of, and if dApps can play a role there? Like the Vitalik Buterin was talking about the social applications, and I think in China there is ratings for people, right? If any of you guys watched Black Mirror, they even have one series there like that when you can basically give a bad rating to a person and their total rating in the country will drop, and based on that they will have some social stance there, so maybe they will not get hired for a certain job and things like that. Do you think on a social scale, like if you can elaborate, maybe dApps are already moving into that, and what's your personal take on that? How do you view that, whether it's fair or it's going to lead us to some very interesting, bad or good world?
Yeah, I can see how it's useful for like credit or under collateralized loans, but largely scared about it because it that sounds like a pretty bleak future if you're like you know if you face tons of like consequences en masse from you know potentially like being trolled or just getting like rated poorly. So yeah.
Yeah, I like it's funny. Obviously, Black Mirror is one of those, TV shows that's like really makes you think a lot. So I do think obviously there's, pros and cons to everything. I do think keeping information on the blockchain is important, especially like if we're talking about, personal documents, passport, even like a vaccination card, those kinds of things. Obviously, it would make a lot of sense because we have all of these things anyways. But people tend, especially in the US, people really tend not to trust specific things, whether it's the government or other things. So I do think there could be some downfall to that. But I guess it depends on like which specific social aspects, you're working with.
Then let's hope for fair voting first and political scale, and then it would be quite good on the social as well, I guess.
Okay, I think we fully answered that question, and we have one more, and we kind of partially covered it in our podcast, but I feel like our listener would be happy to hear about it right now live. And his question is, what innovations in the blockchain technology are likely to influence the future of dApps?
I think one that I mentioned earlier, I do want to touch on again is obviously cross-chain interoperability, right? Because right now, there's specific things like you have to bridge from this to that. The other day I was making a transaction and it like I said, I'm not very well versed in this space. And so like even, doing some simple steps, I was on YouTube for like 30 minutes, I was asking friends, how do I complete this, simple bridge? How do I do this? And so I do think being able to have everything more fluid, seamless across the board, would obviously, bring on more users. And that kind of ties into the whole user experience thing, right? Like making everything a little bit easier. And then another thing, obviously, I think is, layer two scaling solutions would be another one that, they enable faster and cheaper transactions by like processing most of the operations off chain. While at the same time, you're still benefiting from the security and obviously the underlying blockchain.
I would say zero knowledge for me. I like definitely agree with what Taylor was saying, but I think like probably something that will be cool to see, especially in the case of like ZK snarks and stuff, is when you can sort of verify documents or maybe even things like KYC, but kind of preserve people's privacy, or basically just regular like not everybody wants like their transaction history open for stuff. So I think there's like a lot of use cases where like zero knowledge will become a lot more relevant and basically inject like trust into the system where it could be like pretty healthy, which may also help with onboarding more institutions and stuff. But I think that more relates to like regulation than the limits of the technology.
That was their last question. Yeah, Andre, you want to tackle that one?
No, go ahead.
Okay, yeah, that was our last question from our podcast. But I am going through the comments, and you guys have written so many comments, so thank you so much. But there is one question that's forwarded towards Nibiru Chain, and we wanted to ask it out. So, does the team have any plans for compliance with the evolving crypto regulations and standards while maintaining a user-friendly experience for its users?
I guess plans in terms of regulation. I don't know that it's modifying our roadmap that much. I mean, in our case, it's like we're developing dApps on the chain and like, consult counsel about that, but it's largely like, if you're making the network itself, it's not like the huge amount of risk toward you in particular. But I mean, it is pretty exciting that like, you know, the more so like the outcome of the Ripple case, like BlackRock, Fidelity, and like other players signaling, um, you know, to like like I guess my point is it's not all just like SEC crackdowns. So yeah, in the large part we're trying to have everything as decentralized as possible anyway. So I don't foresee it to be a huge challenge. Yeah.
Awesome answer. Thank you guys one more time for your time for this podcast. I think we had some amazing questions and some amazing answers. And if you guys, our listeners, still have any questions, you can always tag us under this post, and maybe one of us will be able to answer again. Thank you for your time. And remember that after our podcast, we'll randomly choose one listener who will receive $50, and we'll be announcing it on Andre's account. So stay tuned, follow CLS and follow Andre's account. And we'll be happy to see you again on our next podcast. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, guys. Thanks for coming.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you.
Bye bye.